So let's move on. We've just finished talking about the notion of static stretching. And what I want to do now, and if you haven't done that, make sure you do go back to that session because it'll be useful for you. What I want to do now is I want to talk about the concept of ballistic stretching. Ballistic stretching. And just by the name of it, you can sort of tell already that this involves kind of moving about. And excuse me, sorry, a bit of a cough at the moment. I'd like to introduce to you that ballistic stretching is one example of a broader methodology which is called dynamic stretching, and we're going to have a look at the ballistic stretching notion. Just look out for that word dynamic stretching. It basically moves stretching with movement. Okay, so just have an awareness of it. I think it's important to do that. So let's have a look at this methodology. What is this athlete doing here? She is effectively swinging her leg up with power, speed and force up into the air. What about this guy here? He's going from this kind of horizontal position to kind of jumping up and going into this sort of doubled up position. Very fast, very powerful, and then back down again, right? Well, probably down and then up actually in that particular order. So what are we actually describing here? We're saying that we've got a stretch which we experience because we have a use of momentum. Now, I'm not going to get into the concept of momentum here. But by momentum, let's just consider it to be a form of movement. There's motion taking place. And I'm going to mention something briefly about momentum. Momentum is greater when the object is heavier, which you probably know. But of course, where we're swinging something like a leg is a heavy object. So if we swing a leg with speed and force, it has a lot of momentum. So it can really have an impact on the muscle, which is ultimately trying to kind of drag it back and stop it stretching from stretching further and damaging. So that momentum, therefore, is an interesting concept. It produces what we would call an extreme range of motion. Extreme range of motion. So in other words, we actually stretch fuller through a fuller ROM, range of motion, because of course the leg starts here and then swings up to a really sort of high position. And obviously it depends on your level of flexibility, but you can get a more extreme range than just the static stretch that we've looked at already. And it tends to involve concepts of swinging, which we've just looked at with the leg, or we sometimes call it circling. You know, you're circling the arms at the shoulder really fast, for example. And it can also be a concept of bouncing. Okay, and we see that with the guy that's in the image over here. It's kind of a bouncing action. And if we think about it, as this person swings their leg up here, what are they getting beyond? Well, they're getting beyond the point of stretch reflex. Remember, stretch reflex is that kind of protection mechanism which stops the muscle stretching too far. You know, let me draw kind of probably was a horribly drawn muscle fiber in here. Muscle fibers are kind of structured in this way. They're long and thin, bit hair-like in many ways, okay, and they're kind of striped like this. Okay, and what their job is to contract inwards and produce force. Okay, so they contract inwards and produce force. But imagine this muscle fiber, through the action of a ballistic stretch, is pushed to a much longer degree. So the muscle fiber ends up being this long as opposed to this long. This is kind of its resting tone in here. Look, let me do it in a different color. This might be the length of the muscle during its resting tone, sort of here. And then as we stretch it through a ballistic stretch, it lengthens out to become much, much longer. And the other point we might want to say is that, well, if the stretch reflex during a static stretch, it might sort of stop it stretching here and here. That's kind of as much as it will allow, but the ballistic stretch allows it to stretch even further beyond that stretch reflex, so it's really effective. Okay, let's go through positives and negatives. Let's do positives first. Look, it's very effective. It really increases flexibility. Okay, so ballistic stretching works. Let's make no bones about it. It works. Again, we can make the points about cheap, accessible little equipment. All that is also true as well. But there is one major issue with this methodology. I'm going to introduce you to an interesting word here. It's called contraindicating. And you might just think, hang on a minute, James, contraindicating, what the heck is that? Contraindicating means that you're likely to have more damage, because of course you are forcing these muscles into a sort of an extreme range. You'd like to have more damage and less effect. So in other words, if we compare how effective it is, which you've already said is very effective, to the potential for injury, the potential for injury kind of outweighs the positive effect. So what do we come up with this methodology? Because it is a very technical thing to do, because it can be potentially damaging, because it has to be done correctly, it's really a methodology that should be used by athletes. So the elderly, children, people who are overweight, people who have not got training history, keep it probably away from them. But if we are highly trained, skilled athlete, or we're working with those people, it's a very effective way. And therefore, because we do it technically correctly, we're less likely to get injuries. Cheers.